You just can't beat that. Hey guys, I thought for this week's video I'm going to do something a little bit different. As you know, I make sourdough pretty much everything. And over the years, when a new friend would start making sourdough for their family, I often get asked, can you share your recipe for your sourdough sandwich loaf? I don't really have a recipe at this point. It started out that way, but I've just done it so many times. I don't really follow exact measurements. I just kind of know what I'm doing at this point. So this isn't really a recipe per se, but I'm going to share with you my sourdough sandwich loaf method. So I'm planning to bake sourdough tomorrow, which means I need to build up my starter tonight. I only maintain a very small starter. This is a bit large now because I fed it earlier. Usually when it's not really active, it's about half that size. So maybe half, 3/4 of a cup total. This is all I keep. I don't do the whole discard and save thing. But anyway, so this is what I usually have as my starter in my jar. And since I'm wanting to make bread tomorrow, I'm going to need more than this. So I'm going to feed it tonight, and I'll show you how I do that. And then in the morning, I will make my bread and let it rise all day before baking. So let me show you how I do this. Quick note before we get started, the method I'm going to show you right now will make 2 loaves of bread. So if you were only wanting 1, you'll need to half everything. Okay, first thing, I'm going to dump all of this into my bowl here. Just use a spoon to get out as much of it as I can. Okay, and then I'm going to use this same jar to get my water. I use water from the Berkey, so it is non-fluorinated, because the chlorine from tap water can kill the bacteria that make your starter active. So I'm going to fill it up to the rim with water and stir it in. So I have my Berkey water. I'm going to use the same spoon to just kind of try to get what's left of that starter that's still kind of stuck to the edges there. Now I'm going to pour the water in and mix it. Now you'll notice my starter is a little bit more brown than maybe some, and that's because I use whole wheat flour for my starter as opposed to all-purpose. When I'm actually baking, I'll use all-purpose, but I found that using the whole wheat for the starter itself, it makes it go a little bit slower and keeps it a little bit happier, if I can put it that way. Now, some of you are going to cringe when I do this, but again, I don't measure. I guess my bread method is more of an art than a science. So I am just going to mix in enough flour to get the consistency that I want, and I will show you what that is. I like to keep mine a little bit on the thicker side. Again, that I have found just lets the starter take a little bit longer to eat through it, which means I'm not like on a super time crunch for using it before it goes flat. And then also, yeah, it just gives it more food that way, and it kind of, I think, makes it rise better because it's not as thin. So kind of a thick, lumpy pancake batter, sort of. Cake batter might be better, a thick cake batter. So that's about how I like it. Make sure you stir it real good with lots of bubbles, air bubbles is mixed in there. Okay, once it's fairly smooth, kind of try to get it off my spoon a bit. And there we go. That is my starter. It is now built up overnight. It will eat through that flour and it will rise really well, and then in the morning we'll be ready to make our dough. Alright guys, it is morning. We've got our starter here all ready to go. It has started sinking just a little bit, but it'll be okay. Ideally, you'll use it when it's in its like domed state, but I never get to that point because I don't get up early enough for that. Anyway, so now we're going to be making our bread before I lose my kitchen to all the chaos. So I have my KitchenAid here. You absolutely do not need to have a stand mixer. I made this bread and kneaded it by hand for years before I got my KitchenAid. But for sake of time, I'm going to use the KitchenAid. So I've got my bowl on here, and we're going to just put all of our ingredients directly in the bowl, and I'll show you how it's done. First things first, anytime you're making a recipe with your sourdough, do not forget to take out some starter first. Otherwise, you might accidentally put all of it in your recipe, and then you won't have any left for next time you want to make something. You'll have to start from scratch. So I always do this the very first thing. I built this up last night, you saw, and now before I make my bread, I'm going to put some of it back into my jar, new clean jar, and feed it. Then I will start my bread. And for the sake of those wondering, again, I'm not measuring. I use, that's the 1/4 cup mark. So I keep about a 1/4 cup of starter. Then of course I'll feed it so it'll get a little bit higher, but that's all I keep in my jar. I don't feed it no cup at a time or anything like that because that's a lot of waste. So just a tiny bit, about a 1/4 cup. Okay, remember I told you this isn't really a recipe. I have no idea the exact amount of starter is in here. I'm just going to dump it all in. Like I said, I haven't measured this in years. I've just done it so many times. I know that when I feed my starter as much as I showed you last night, then it's the right amount. Okay, so all of that starter started in there. Like I said, I make this recipe at least once a week, sometimes twice, so it is super easy, not a lot of time requirement. Now this is the only thing that I actually measure is 1 cup of water. Again, just from the Berkey. About 1 tablespoon of salt, which is more than you think. Again, I don't measure. That's about a tablespoon. About a 1/4 cup of olive oil. This is what will give you your really soft crumb. So 4 times around the bowl is about a 1/4 cup. Okay, flour. I mentioned I use whole wheat for feeding my starter, but for making the actual bread, I'm just going to use all-purpose. I'm going to start with about 4.5 cups, and then I can add more if needed. Again, not measuring, not leveling off, just scooping. Dough hook. I'm going to start off just on stir until that flour gets incorporated so it doesn't poof up everywhere. And I can bump it up to 2. But no higher than 2 for bread. Alright, so while that is stirring, I'm going to go ahead and grease my bread pans. I just have standard glass loaf pans, and I literally just use an old butter wrapper to grease them with. Super easy. Alright, back to this dough. This is a little bit too sticky, so I'm going to add just a tiny bit more flour. And I will say this part I find easier when you're kneading by hand because I always struggle adding flour when my KitchenAid is doing it. But just add a little bit at a time. Let that work itself in and then check again. This is the issue I always come up with if I have to add flour while I'm using the KitchenAid. It likes to stick to the beater and then just kind of spin around instead of incorporating. If you have any tips for that, please let me know because I have yet to figure it out. Alternate option, which if it needs more flour, I will show you, is you could just add it all by hand. Since this is deciding to be sticky today, which sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, depends on a lot on the humidity in the air. I could just keep adding a little bit and stirring here, but for those of you without a KitchenAid, I'm gonna go ahead and add the rest of my flour by hand just to show you the kneading process. I'm just gonna dust the surface a little bit there. And get my dough. It really doesn't need that much more, just a tiny bit. Let's get all of that out of there. Sometimes it'll stick to the bowl a little bit. An easy trick, if you just put a tiny bit of flour in there, it gives you enough friction to kind of get it off the sides. Okay, now we're just gonna knead it. For kneading, you just fold it in half, use the palm of your hands to press it down, rotate, and do it again. And that's probably, might be all the flour we really need. Didn't need much. If you're doing this whole process by hand, you'll stir in what you can with a spoon, and then you'll start your kneading for the rest. All right, this is about good. You'll know it's kneaded enough when you can press it and it bounces right back without leaving a hole. This is a little bit tacky to touch, so that's ideal. You want it to be just a little bit tacky, but not so sticky that it's sticking to the counter or sticking to your hands. Okay, so this part is the same whether you use the KitchenAid or do it by hand. We're gonna split this in half for our 2 loaves. You can twist it by hands, but it will stick to it a little bit. Or you can use, I don't even know what this is called, a little scraper tool. All I do, just knead it a couple times to get it into a round shape. And then we're just gonna tuck and turn to kind of form a little bit of surface tension here. And then just stick it right in our pan. Okay, we've got our 2 loaves. The last step is just to cover these with a wet tea towel. This is just a cloth napkin that I have wet with warm water. And I'll just cover it like that and let it sit to rise. Now, as far as rising times go, the longer you let it rise, the healthier and easier to digest it will be. You could stick this in the refrigerator overnight and then let it rise in the morning. That will allow the sour time more time to break down the anti-nutrients and things like that. Or you could just leave it on the counter for ideally around 8 hours. But again, with sourdough, it's a little bit more of an art than a science. And your ambient temperature and humidity do play a big role in it. In the summer, I could easily only have it rising for about 5 hours, but in the winter, sometimes it takes longer. So just keep an eye on it a little bit throughout the day. You want it to be really nice and risen before it starts to fall flat. And I will show you that later. Once this has risen, the rest of my day is hands off. I can go do other projects. So just a few minutes in the morning and you're done until evening. All right, guys, it has been 8 hours. You see that lovely rise we have there. It still has a little bit of rise left in it, but I'm going to go ahead and put it into a cold oven and then turn the oven on to 350 degrees. And then that heating up stage, the preheating of the oven, will actually give it just that last oomph it needs to finish rising before it actually starts to bake. As I said, not really a recipe, more of a method. I can't tell you exactly how long it takes for the bread to bake. I would say maybe around 45 minutes. Basically, when we start smelling it, it smells amazing. We go to check it. You'll want it to be just lightly golden on top, and when you kind of flick at it, it has kind of a hollow sound. So I'll show you that. I think this is almost done. Almost there. Now, all the bread experts will tell you to let the bread cool completely before slicing so that the crumb, as they call it, can finish developing. But I don't know who has that much willpower to resist cutting a loaf of bread fresh out of the oven and slathering it with butter. You just can't beat that. So anyways, I hope you have enjoyed this video. I hope that it has perhaps helped you in your sourdough journey and given you another recipe to throw in your arsenal. Like I said, I make this at least once a week, sometimes twice. And so it's really quick and easy, really hands-off, and something that I can fit into my very busy schedule. So I hope that will be a help to you. This is what we use pretty much for everything, from our morning toast, sandwiches, whatever the case may be. I do sometimes make like a rustic round loaf, but those are more special occasions for us. This is our everyday. So hope that helps you. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or if you tried it out and how you liked it. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and we'll see you next time.